name. So you can see that at the beginning there. You can also see the service, the actual deployment name with text embedding when I call that API. And the other big thing that changed a lot since the last time I ran it in Postman was the actual changing of the AP version. So a lot of those, troubles that we have when we're doing demos can actually benefit you as well, in that these can be some of the normal sort of processes that you go through as things start to change as well. So where you can see, I've actually just set up some parameters there, and that one's got the API. That one's actually got the API version. Not that one's actually a mistake there, but it's not me using it anyway. When you go into the headers, you can see the new API key. So that was one of the other things that had to change as well. And then you can see this is pretty much the same. So when you run this, you get a huge amount of output. You can see it goes pages and pages and pages of the embeddings that are generated because of that input prompt. So as you can see, the embeddings are quite numerous when it goes to work all that out. So just a huge amount of information there. So that's why it's useful to have something like Postman or test this in curl to work out what's going on behind the scenes. So that one worked out quite well after a little bit of finagling because I had the wrong thing. The one other thing that I'm struggling with at the moment, a couple of different things that you might experience in your environment. So if you've put something behind a firewall, in a network, a particular private network, just remember to turn that on. So that was part of the other issues I was facing before. I just got caught off guard by not actually having connected to the VPN. Normally when you're in the class, of course, when you're doing the labs, you're turning the VPN off. So I just turned that one back on just to make sure everything was working. So I'm now able to access my storage account. So that can be one of those things that you experience as well back in, and you might need to troubleshoot that. That took me a while to realise, because I usually have my VPN on. It took me a while to realise that actually I didn't have my VPN. So once I got that up and running, that was able to access that, because a lot of this information has been uploaded from my OneDrive, which is under VPN, and basically that's why I couldn't access it next time I came in. That's a bit of a gotcha there. So I've partially solved the storage issue when it comes to labeling. So hopefully by tomorrow I'll also be able to re-show you that demo that didn't quite work on Monday about the labeling project. It's kind of an additional thing you have anyway, but I want to make sure, having showed you that, how you would go about labeling things for your AI projects, for custom vision, for example, or maybe even text or audio or something like that that you might want to use. All right, let's have a look at some prompt engineering now. And different considerations for different endpoints there. We'll have a look at some prompt engineering techniques. So one of the things you often have to do is explain its reasoning, because it might be hallucinating, it might be giving you the wrong answer there. So quite often we're still having to do a bit of legwork to check that it's actually responding with the right information. And then just different techniques you can use with prompt engineering as well. So because we're using this as a research, we're also using it for applications, but we also, day in and day out, we actually use it for researching what we're going to put into our project. So of course, we're always looking for documentation. So these are not going to just help you for your applications you're building, but also when you're trying to research the different methods using something like Copilot, GitHub Copilot, also the Copilots that exist in your 365 subscriptions, and lots of other places. So if you're using Gemini, it's going to help you with that, because large language models are very, very similar in the way that you can tune them. So just looking at the prompt, you'd start with the most relevant or accurate information pertaining to what you're trying to get out of either a text completion or a prompt, just a chat itself. But you also want to make sure that when you specify when you want it in a particular format, that does bring it back in that particular format. So have a think about the sort of styles of the writing, so whether it's more creative, or whether you want to actually have it formatted so it's in bullet point or in tables. So especially if you're taking that information then presenting it to a group, when you're doing any presentations or anything like that in PowerPoint, you want a certain amount to already be formatted, or maybe even generate it so that it goes into an Excel spreadsheet later on. A nice one there that you often want to use is if you're trying to do some test data inside of, for example, Visual Studio, and you're using something like Python or C Sharp, you want to be able to say, give that to me in the form of a Python data frame or in an array or something like that if you're using a different programming language. So that way you're able to not have to spend so much time like we used to in the old days manufacturing data so that you can test. And of course GitHub has some really nice ways to help you with that as well, including generating some of the tests. Because one of the things you can do in there is ask it to generate test bed code as well. So it does a really good job of that. And of course, all these co-pilots have got that basis in all that information that's on GitHub. So it always provides really good information there. You also want to provide conversational context. So I did that as an example before. Maybe a little bit about the topic that you're interested in, and so that it's able to get better semantic meaning out of how you've used that in a sentence. So have a think about how you use it. Try to reduce any ambiguities. And the last one there is mitigate any bias and improve fairness. So that could be also something that you're trying to do. Make sure that it's inclusive of more information, I suppose, than less information, and a diverse group of data or prompts can actually improve quite a bit. So these are some of the considerations about prompt engineering. And as we looked at that pyramid, that would be the very most basic thing that you can do when you start to use this. So just even from the one on the left versus the one on the right, running a product description there, what you can see is it's come back with a fairly good example of a water bottle that you're marketing. But on the right-hand side, if you give it a little bit more information, it's able to produce a lot more to in line with what you're trying to achieve. So it has mentioned 100% recycled materials in this one. And it's also gone to the length where it talks about each purchase of this bottle removes 10 pounds of plastic from the oceans, making a responsible choice. So as you can see, just giving a little bit more information results in much better response. And I suppose the only thing I would say, for people that are non-native speakers of English, I do notice that they're a little bit hesitant to use this in a lot of examples. So they want to try and, especially if you've been in the developer area, you're not necessarily a very wordy person. So you tend to want to just put the minimum in. And unfortunately, the prompts do respond better when they have a lot more information. So it's a tough thing when you're a quiet person to actually move into that area and be a bit more wordy. So it can be a little bit, so there's lots of good examples out there to have a look on some of the Reddit, Medium, those sorts of websites showing you how to get the most out of that as well. So I know that can be, I know I suffer from that as well. And a lot of people say, I don't want to type. That's the other thing. So I suppose the good news is you can use audio with that as well these days. All right, so some of the things that do help is you can have section markers. So you can either use the dashes or the hashes for that. And that can actually highlight what is the primary content that you're trying to impart. So you can see the primary content, we're looking for ideas for webinars. And it's all about the summer school program. Webinars, particularly in AI and web development there. So you've actually outlined really well providing that primary content, and then you go in and provide some supporting content as well. So a little bit more about what you're interested in: AI, webinar dates, and submission deadlines. That's like it's like pulling teeth. You're trying to get information out of people to put in here. That's a little bit more, but it's still in the same sort of vein as what you've seen so far. And then you can you give it the direction on what you want, which is extract the keywords from the above email and put them in a bulleted list. You can also give it a little bit more grounding information. So if it's a little bit confused about AI, it shouldn't be, but if it is, you can talk a little bit about what you mean by AI. So you're just elaborating on there. And of course, acronyms are the killer for any of this. AI knows what that is, but there's lots of acronyms that are used for multiple purposes, and of course that can be real trouble when it comes to ambiguity, and it's not going to know necessarily what you're talking about. So, and where and when did the field of AI start is the question that you're asking there. So you saw me use a little bit earlier cues. So cues are really useful when you sort of started off down the path of what you wanted to complete. So I gave it a little bit of a description around SQL and the databases associated there. But then I put in, you can put in SQL Select, or you can put in Select, for example. That's actually the cue to tell it what sort of information you want. So you want it to return a query. If you wanted to use KQL, you would give it a slightly different cue for that because it doesn't start with Select. You might say you want to project, which is similar to Select, and you might want to start by the table and all that sort of thing as well. So between the two, SQL and KQL, Custom Query Language, there's slight nuances there. So you're going to provide a different first keyword there for that. Sets the scope and the format of what you're expecting without imparting too much information. So in this particular one, they've used the word review so that it's quite clear to the chat that it knows, the assistant, that it knows that you're outlining a few different reviews. So there might be a whole list of those reviews. And then once you get into what you're telling it you want to actually summarize those reviews. And that's going to be the most common complaint. So it's going to go up and look at each review individually and know each one of those is going to be a complaint that it then needs to basically summarize. So it's pulled out a couple there and responded with that. So you can define a name and parameter also for a Python function. If you were using, for example, this idea of queues, you could do that as well. So of course, I'd already talked about that a little bit between KQL and SQL. So that's the benefit of using queues. And of course, to produce this in such a nice way, in this particular one, you're seeing output composition in a table format. And of course, if you were generating data, that makes a very nice Python or Pandas data frame there. So you can pretty much put that from a table into some other form, like a data frame, for example. So that's really useful. And of course, when you're doing this through the system messages and the user assistant messages, you can call this in the code. So here's some examples here, and of course, we're getting it to talk like an old-time American film star, for example, Western film character. So in this case, you can see you're a casual helpful assistant and you talk like an American old Western film character. So you've given it some direction there on its persona. And then, can you direct me to the library? It's the first question, and then of course it answers in the way that a person would have normally answered. So using words like howdy, stranger, huh? And your very common ways that you would often see in old Western films. So I won't do the accent, but there you go. You can actually see happy trails there at the end, which is quite very much like an old Western. You can imagine John Wayne saying something like that. Few shot learning we covered before earlier this morning, so just a bit of a recap there. Give it a system message, And then it is the back and forth between the user and assistant. Then finally, on that last one there, that's when you actually ask the question that you want to know, really. So you can't miss this. And then it'll say, that's a positive comment there. So each one of those, very similar also to that example we had with the sports, weather, politics, various things that we had that we told it how we wanted it to react. So in this case, we're telling it to do sentiment analysis, and it's pretty much done a good job there. So this is considered few-shot learning in this example. Now that's that second. You try prompt engineering first, and then you think about few-shot learning as that next option to try out. So we talked about that a little bit earlier too. Chain of thought. So if it's gone really pear-shaped, if the response is not what you would expect, then you can always come back and give it a bit of another go to fix those. So for example, chain of thought, you can ask it, what is its reasoning behind why you've answered that way? So in this particular question, we've got what sport is easiest to learn but hardest to master? So it's given a couple of things. So it said basically at the end there that I would say tennis is the sport that is easiest to learn but hardest to master. And then it would give you the reasoning of what it thinks is easy to learn and hard to master if you ask it to actually explain your reasoning there. Or why do you say that? Or are you making this up? Something like that, just to challenge it. For a sport to be considered easy to learn, it would have to have simple rules and require minimum equipment. So one of the things it talks about here, it does go a little bit off. So we know that tennis, golf probably takes a little bit more money to get started in, because even a second-hand pair of golf clubs is going to be quite expensive. There's lots of different putters and drivers and things like that you need, and irons. So you can see here it's considered different sports that fit these criteria. So it's got tennis and golf there. Some sports that would be considered easy to learn but harder to master include this. So then we get down a little bit further to what it said in its step 3 to say trying to defend its answer there. It does say tennis and golf both require expensive equipment, and that's not exactly true. Golf might, but tennis, pretty easy to get a second-hand racket pretty cheaply, and it doesn't cost much for balls either. So it's made a little bit of a mistake. The answer's still okay, but it's made a little bit of a mistake there. So that's why it's so important, especially with the hallucinations that it tends to have. If you haven't grounded it or given it, for example, your own data, it can really go off the rails there. So it's often really important to understand how it derived that particular solution. All right, so I think we've come up to the next exercise, and we're going to use prompt engineering in your app now. So this is next lab of the day. So you'll finish off with not too hard a day. We'll see if we can, we've got another lab after this one. So what we'll do is see if we can stretch a little bit with some prompt flow. I'll try to get those working. They weren't working earlier this morning, so I've got to work out what's going on with my environment. And we'll see whether we can do a few of those other things together as well. But for now, let's do the lab, and then we'll have a little bit more instructions. We're about 3/4 of the way through the instructions for the day. So we'll do a little bit more instructions after this, and then we'll finish off for the day around afternoon tea time. So we did actually have our break very early today. So it's a little bit of an easier day on the Wednesday. Terry, what were you going to ask?
Yeah, hi. I just finished the lab. The first one, the app thing, it was quite amazing. So I finished
that's
that.
good.
Yeah, so I'm just thinking, like I asked you a question yesterday about setting up the context. So when we, managing, sending the message history to keep the context ready, that the conversation happened in past, so my API knows that what I have asked earlier and what it has responded me back, so
Yep.
that it can relate back to going forth and I can continue the conversation on. There's a one limit though for the tokens, right? So which
Yep.
means that if you keep on adding more question, more responses, the token size will increase. For instance, in our exercise, we did increase the tokens to 1200, so that keep communicating. But it won't go beyond that in a 1200 mark, then it will become lazy or may not do those things. How to handle that one? How can we, optimize that a bit? Like we can increase token and then it dynamically understand the conversation is a
Yep.
new conversation, so there won't be a context there. So it can reset itself. So that way, in our code or implementing a solution, we don't need to worry about, updating it in a code every time, right? It's hard for a live application to manage that. How can we do that? And I think I asked yesterday a question about sending a data with a prompt for relevant questions. Like for
Yep.
example, a RAG thing which we talked about yesterday to send through the SQL schema, so that the AI knows about what schema we are referring to. Like you showed an example of AdventureWorks database, right? Earlier,
Yep.
that database is available right in the web, and
Yep.
AI might have a context of that database already. How to set a context of the new database or new data lake into the AI? Is there a way we can do that? That will be amazing if you can have that such a solution, because a lot of people need such kind of application in my company to implement some kind of bot to help them into day-to-day work.
Yep. Yeah. So I'll see if I can get you still some more answers to that. The way that we talked about that one yesterday was you would bring in the data using RAG, like we talked about before. So that'll also come in with all that sort of information. So I'll see if I can get you some answers on that token increase, for example, as well. So it might be that in your example, we said this yesterday, it's probably going to be a fine tuned example. So you might want to create your own model for that particular one. I think that's probably more likely what's going to happen with that one. So that was one of the options we could look to fine tuning for that. I'll see if there's anything else though, but I don't have much hope for that other than pegging that as a fine tuning example. Probably is going to be most likely because of the volume that you've got, and also the fact that you want to be able to respond quite often and tell people something's changed and all that sort of thing. Yeah, so that one's going to be a little bit tricky. All right, cool. Thank you for that. Anything else that anyone was thinking?
Uh, for that, the RAG thing. So when so my idea is to when the app is logged open, they will log in and they will connect to one certain database. They won't be connecting to multiple databases. So I can send the context of one database at a time. But when they switch the context, I can change the database context, and then the new schema will pass on. But some databases are having 400 tables, so it's hard for me to manage that thing.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
small databases are easy, but big databases are very hard because it wants to respond very quickly. It takes a lot of time to respond back with the queries.
yeah, yep, definitely. So I suppose that's where I don't know how. I'm thinking about some sort of encoding option for that. So reducing down the table names, for example, and it's almost like to set that example up, you could refer to tables slightly differently, like with a number, and then that number could be save you a lot of tokens as well. So it's almost like the information in the database is encoded as opposed to still in the long names that you would be used to with the table names, and then having some sort of mapping behind the scenes to if the table's called employee, then it might just be called E, for example. So you give each of the tables behind the scenes an alias that's smaller, and then that way you're going to save on the tokens as well, I think. But yeah, just that was one of the thoughts I had today. But yeah, we'll have to have a look at that and see if we can come up with a good idea. So if anyone on the call also is interested in doing something similar to that, or has any suggestions, that'd be really helpful for Turindeep for his use case. So yeah, definitely. All right. The only other thing I would say about databases is because you've got a lot of metadata associated with that, it's probably better to have that extracted into another source each night. So rather than having to go and interrogate using a SQL statement, you could probably dump all of that information. And even if you think about the shorthand for how we used to write when we're normalizing databases and we used to show the relationships, you used to be able to provide a sentence for that. So, yeah, I suppose there's some ways we can decrease the amount, but and then the other option is for saving money using an earlier model. So one of the things I've often told people in this course is you can use an earlier model. There's no need to always have the bleeding edge model. You don't possibly need it. Then use an earlier model because it's going to be a lot cheaper as well. So that's another thing to think about. All right, we'll see if anyone can come up with any suggestions. That'd be fantastic. So definitely databases is one of those things that changes quite often, and trying to incorporate that into a DevOps plan can be very different as well. You also want to communicate when those changes have happened as well. All right, let's have a look at the next lab. Let's see if we can get any more information on that use case. And let's have a look at the lab now. Any other questions? Okay, let's have a look at the lab. So this one we'll be doing is prompt engineering in your app. So you've already done the integration. So next one is going to be lab 10. And then we'll finish off the day with the RAG model, which is bring your own data. So lab's now on. And we'll set up some time for that as well. You may not need the 45 minutes. So if you want, we can always finish this early as well. So let's start the timer. Then we'll come back and we'll talk about RAG as the last option for the day, and see if we can also do some cool things on prompt flow. So I'll try and get that one working now, just so that I can show you a bit more of a demo. It's outside of the scope, but it's an interesting one that you might want to use, which is like bring your own data and use Wikipedia as your data source. All right, have fun with the lab, and we'll see you back soon. And just yell out if you get stuck or you have any concepts you want to discuss or anything like that.